Well, I'd like to start by thanking CADAF for having us here today on our virtual panel. I've done quite a few of these, and in the new normal, we get the ease of doing them from our office. Of course, I wish I could be on stage with my friends today to talk in person, but I think this will do for now. So when Helena reached out to me and asked what I'd like to do a panel around, I thought about how a lot of the folks that I talk to that are sort of traditional art collectors have questions around, well, you know, why collect digital art, or how to collect digital art. I can see these things for free in some cases if they're just digital images on my screen. So, you know, why would I go and buy them? And how, you know, if I do buy them, do I get the code, or what is it that I own? And, you know, is the code the art, or is the image the art? So I thought a lot of those questions could be best answered by talking to artists that work digitally, and I think in all cases are also collectors, to dig a little bit deeper into what this space is about and why collect and how you can collect. So I've asked four friends to join us on the panel, four artists. So Mario Klingemann, who I'll let each of them give their own introduction, but maybe I'll just give a brief introduction about how I know these folks. Mario, I think I first started seeing his name and his work in the early 2000s in the processing forums. So when I started learning to do generative art and learning to program, a lot of times the work that inspired me, or the people that were answering the questions, you know, Mario was sort of an important figure going back 20 years or more. I think he'll probably share a bit, but got his start in the 90s, I think, doing this type of work. So really is someone that I look up to and someone whose career I followed for a long time and excited to have on the panel. Helena Sarin, who I started following her work, I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, when she started creating work using artificial intelligence, specifically machine learning and GANs. So Helena has a pretty rich history, both as a computer scientist, but also as an artist working in traditional materials. And I really enjoy the way she combines those two things together. Sometimes I worry that as we embrace more and more technology, the work becomes so algorithmic that it starts to get a bit repetitive. And I really like how Helena introducing analog components of sort of historical or traditional art help break from sort of the monotony of the same work being kind of all the work starting to converge and start to look the same. And now follow her work very closely, and was able to publish, Helena put out what I consider to be a really important essay called Neural Bricolage. I think it was about 2 years ago, and she let me publish that essay on Artnome. So my background is that I've got a blog called Artnome that focuses on the intersection of art and technology. And I was able to write a preface for Helena's work, which was a real honor, the Neural Bricolage essay, and publish and share that on Artnome. And Anne Spalter, who I discovered through her collection. So Anne has been really an advocate for digital art and generative art, going back again several decades when nobody was really thinking that any of this work was important or collecting it. Anne and her husband had started a very important early collection that I now consider to be probably the most important collection out there, certainly the most important and largest private collection of generative art. She did work early on in building out an education system. I believe it's around at Brown and RISD. Is that right, Anne?
Exactly. Yes.
Some of the earliest curriculum around this kind of work, and also wrote a book that was really important in helping sort of spread interest in the space. So really value all the work that she does, but also is a working artist who has most recently also been working with artificial intelligence. So Anne's able to give us sort of multiple perspectives as a really important collector, as someone who is, I would consider, sort of a digital art historian, and an academic, but also as an artist. And then the last person who may or may not be joining us, Prince Jakan Osinachi, is an artist working out of Nigeria who we invited, but he may be having some technical issues joining. I'll go ahead and give a quick intro for him so that if he does join, we can just kind of pick up from there. So I first discovered Osinachi's work on the blockchain art markets. I think it might have been through Super Rare, although it could have been another blockchain art market. For folks that don't know what that is, I won't go into the whole definition of the blockchain now, but the idea is that artists can buy and sell works that are digital and through the blockchain, which makes them provably rare. So this concern about when I buy a digital work, how do I know that I own it versus someone else owning it? And the blockchain helps solve that issue. So I'm a big fan of Osinachi's work, but part of why I invited him and why I was excited to have him on is because he didn't have a lot of access to computers and software and things like that in Nigeria, where he grew up, and actually taught himself to use Microsoft Word in a pretty amazing way to create these portraits. So Word's that crappy word processor that we all have that's sort of ubiquitous. And despite, millions and millions of people using it, he somehow managed to find sort of a new way to use it. And it makes his work quite unique. So the combination of how he's using technology and then how he's really from Nigeria, where he probably wouldn't have access to this world stage, been able to tap into these blockchain markets to really grow an audience. It's pretty interesting to me. So he may join in a bit later as well. So that's sort of a brief intro. Maybe just quickly, if there's anything each of you would want to add to that, maybe, and just introduce yourself, and then we can hop into some questions. I'll go left to right, at least based on my screen. Mario, why don't you just say hi and kind of give a brief intro?
It looks like Osinachi just connected, but okay, well, okay. Until that happens, one thing I have to correct you. It's not Klingemann, it's Klingemann.
That's fair. I bet I got everyone's name wrong. I'm mostly reading.
But you know how I'm always concerned about my name getting spelled wrong. Now it's even getting pronounced wrong, so no, don't worry. Okay, let me do it quick. Yeah, as you said, I'm doing kind of art with computers since quite a while. I'm self-taught and also started out like wanting to make art with the help of computers, or kind of before the internet started. So in a way, I also did not have really role models that you can be an artist doing this stuff. I mean, in the 80s, this was still kind of very obscure and you couldn't, I didn't even know that there had been already like 10, 20 years before all the pioneers, because, well, you would have to go to the right library to find kind of a book because it was still a bit unknown. But yeah, so over time, I kind of made my way like by combining programming and visual art into becoming an artist. So I don't know. I guess for now that should be it. I don't want to tell too much. And yes, in the past 5 years, I'm pretty much kind of focused on using AI, or what we call it, to help me make the art. And yeah, that's maybe what people now know me most for. Okay, but maybe we say hi to Osinachi now that he's arrived.
Hey, Osinachi, how are you? Welcome. Can you hear us okay?
Muted.
Can you hear us okay, Osinachi? Maybe are you on mute?
Yeah, there.
Well, maybe while he's unmuting, oh, hello? I'm not sure if CADAF can unmute him remotely. I think you're on mute. Let me do a real quick
well,
check.
I can see the little red microphone.
Yeah, I think you need to share the panel to unmute him. CADAF should be able to unmute him.
You are on mute, Osinachi. Let's see. And given this is recorded, I think they'll be able to edit this out. So issues.
Oh,
Otherwise,
I think it's
otherwise, it's the old joke. How many digital artists does it take to unmute?
Hi guys, sorry I'm late.
Yeah,
Yay.
no, that's okay. Welcome. We're really excited to have you.
Yeah.
So Osinachi, I've just gone through and given sort of a high level introduction of the panel, and that really it's about focusing on the idea of collecting digital art from sort of the artist's view, and helping folks understand what this is about and why they might want to collect. And then I just briefly gave sort of an intro on how I know folks, you know, that are on the panel, what the background is. But I'm going back through and giving everyone sort of a chance to say hi and just give a brief introduction. Maybe actually, if you want, do you want to just say hello real quickly and maybe give a little bit about your background?
Okay, yeah. My name is Osinachi. I'm a Nigerian digital artist. Right now I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. And my work can be seen on various platforms such as Super Rare, Makerspace, Variable, and the rest. And I'm really glad to be part of this session.
Great, thank you so much. Excited to have you here. So going down the line, Helena, you want to say hello real quick and just kind of give a quick intro?
Yeah, I'm Helena, and I think you basically covered more of my spiel. But the only thing that I'd like to add that in the last few months, I'm obsessed with artist books making. And when I started like being on the Super Rare, it kind of dawned on me that it will be an interesting angle to take this asset, like physical asset, and maybe somehow digitize it into what kind of form it will take. So that's kind of on the back burner of my mind right now.
Great, yeah, I want to make sure we come back and talk a bit about artist books. Okay. I know we got to make
for sure.
Back when I was in school, and I find the format sort of fascinating.
Absolutely.
And Anne, you want to say hello and maybe do a brief intro?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Jason, for having me on the panel and to CADAF. And I think, again, you covered the basics, and maybe I just say that I started out as an artist being trained traditionally at the Rhode Island School of Design, studying painting and drawing, and I really never thought that I would use the computer. In fact, I thought there was something wrong with making art with the computer. So it continues to be a shock to me to be so fully immersed and all in this field in the way that I am. And I ended up loving the computer and then starting to teach courses at Brown and RISD on the computer in the fine arts. And as part of that, began to look for resources to help me teach. And not finding exactly what I need, I began working on the textbook that you mentioned. And as part of that, began interviewing pioneers in the field of computer art, the early people that we ended up collecting. And through that began to know all these pioneers like Frieder Naki and Manfred Moore and many others. And it was just so taken with their incredible persistence in the face of amazing hostility to the art world at that time in creating their work. And just so many great stories that I heard coming out of it. So became really interested in the field. And my husband and I began collecting the early work, which then eventually turned into quite a large collection. So I do sort of wear many hats in the field. And I think it's interesting because it lets me look at it from different directions. But I'm an enthusiast from all of the directions.
No, that's great. So thank you, Anne, and thank you to everybody for giving sort of that introduction and the hello. I think one of the questions that I wanted to start with, and it's the benefit of being the moderator, is I get to ask the things that I'm most curious about. You know, I wonder how you all think about collectors and audiences, and whether or not those are the same thing. So I'm famous for giving multi-step questions that are confusing and hard to remember. So ask me to repeat if it gets confusing. But is an audience and our collectors essentially the same thing, or are those two different groups? And how do you think about your audience versus collectors if they're different? And I'm not sure how we'll wrangle this so that everybody goes in order, but if anyone has thoughts and wants to start, we'll just kind of start with a free for all. And if we need to restore order, we can do it. So anyone have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start. Because as you might remember, I started on Twitter, basically. This is where I happened and begin to flourish, because I got support from Mario, from you, from so many folks. And that's my audience. And in a sense, when I do something, I keep it in mind. So it's for me and for, say, people on Twitter. But if I look at people, there are like some collectors that started like with my analog work. They buy my prints, they buy my books. These are kind of orthogonal people. They subscribe to my website, but I don't, maybe they know me from Twitter, but some found me just Googling or something. So again, and that's how I keep it in mind, that on Twitter, it's basically admirers. I don't see, I mean, if we go to numbers, there's a very like low yield from this crowd. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's like two different things.
Got it. So when you say a low yield, do you mean there's a large amount of Twitter followers, but only a smaller number that are actually collected?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
So it's Instagram or like Googling or some subscribers on the website. It's pretty much nobody from Twitter.
So you're a digital artist, but also your primary method of connecting with people and collectors and your audience is also digital, which isn't always the case, right? There are digital artists who primarily show in galleries or do things in person, but it sounds like
yeah, I'm kind of like creature of internet. This is where I happened.
I love it. Anyone else that wants to add to that?
Yes, for me, I think the idea of collector audience, I think, can be mixed at some point. For example, I feel that collectors are people who have the financial ability to actually buy the work and keep, right? But then for the audience, it could be just anyone who enjoys art. Let's look at the traditional space. You walk into a gallery and you just want to look at the artworks and to get a feel of what it's about. Or you visit an artist's Instagram page, for example, mine, and you scroll through. And in the process of being a part of the audience, you could actually become a collector because you could see something you like and you feel you can actually collect this. You go ahead and pay for it. So being a collector is about, what makes you a collector to me is about the money you have to actually collect this work and keep. And for the audience, is the whole enjoyment that comes with it, not necessarily finance.
Got it. So do you think that there's people in the audience who don't necessarily have the money to be able to collect, but who can be just as passionate, that you see as just as passionate about your work?
Yes, there are. Recently, I was texting a collector in the US, and she was supposed to look at my exhibition at CADAF Gallery in Switzerland. She had already bought a work from a marketplace before, a physical print, and she was interested in seeing what I had in this exhibition and probably to buy. And she went in and she came back and was like, "Wow, I can't afford you anymore." And she went on to say, "Yeah, she'll keep supporting me. She loves my work and all that." So you see, at that point, I feel that is the point where value comes in, where a collector says that, "Hey, I want to get this," and they go ahead and make the effort to get it. But then they can still be your audience whereby they're not putting in money. And at the end of the day, it's just different ways of enjoying the artwork. But one stage leads to the other, which is, of course, being first the audience and then moving on to become a collector.
No, that's helpful. Yeah, I think there's the audience. My experience from the artist side and from the collector side and sort of the appreciator side is that there's sort of emotional support that can be felt as an artist that can be just as valuable as a collector maybe spending the money, getting an audience member who really cares about what you do and is following it and sort of giving feedback. It seems like that can be just as helpful. I'm gonna stick Mario with the difficult part of this question, since the first two folks haven't answered that part yet, which is, do you have an audience in mind?
Yes, I'm my only audience that I kind of work for. So it's actually weird, but in the end, I always feel I'm my harshest critic, and in the end, I try always to make stuff that surprises me or that I find interesting. And it's of course I need an audience, and I put it out there, and who doesn't like to get positive feedback or tons of likes or something? But I also have always the suspicion that if I get, it's usually on the stuff that that's too popular, where I feel like, yeah, okay, I made it too easy. So
Yeah.
of course you always have to balance these things that, like, I mean, the art that I really want to make, I probably can't sell, or in the end, it's something that takes 2 or 3 years until like it finds the audience, or the audience has grown to the point where, and then I already got bored of it. So that's the problem, right? You made something, and then like you found, let's say, like, well, you were lucky enough to find like the 3 people who actually like this, and then they would like to have more, but I have moved on. So there's always this difficulty. But yeah, in the end,
It's
well,
the
okay, let's see, and like maybe 5 of my peers. I mean, I'm always happy if Helena likes my stuff. So
it's the Leonard Skinner Freebird problem, right? There's the famous guy in the crowd yelling, "Play Freebird!" You know, they just want to hear that one song over and over and over again. So like you make something that resonates with people, and they kind of want to see the same thing from you over and over again. Well, I wonder though, Mario, you know, if you really love a work and you know the audience doesn't necessarily going to like it, do you continue, you know, or would you be happier making a work that you love that others don't necessarily resonate with than you would be making something that you're just okay with that really resonates?
Well, no, well, it is this psychological problem, right? You put up something where you put a lot of work into, and then it just fizzles away. And there has been a time when it got me really frustrated, but I got so used to this now that I think, well, you just don't deserve it. So
Yeah.
no, it's okay. These are how these things go, and then I make the next thing. I mean, that's just how I work. I always have to make the next thing, and I always hope that it doesn't get lost somewhere in that's the only problem, like, because yeah, that everything is so temporary these days, right? You make something, and it's like, if it's great, then even then it's just great for 2 days or 3 days, and then gets washed away. But it's still there, but nobody finds it. So I mean, maybe it's good to have something like a good portfolio site where people can go back, because usually, like Helena, Twitter is my kind of main outlet, which is stupid, because like, I think on Instagram, I guess you sell more, or on like if like on the blockchain in the certain groups, but it's, I don't know, maybe I'm a bit naive, and or I'm just kind of, well, because I'm doing it for myself, as long as I can pay my rent, I just keep on going.
Yeah.
Try to think too much about selling. So I hope at some point somebody will recognize my genius, and then, well, I still be able to sell new stuff and not just my old stuff.
There you go. So
Thank you, Mario.
Hey, bye.
If I could chip in, I think the main concern for an artist, personally for me, is actually to make something that, of course, challenges me in the first place, and is somehow very much better than what I've done in the past. And I feel that the thought of having the audience in your mind before you start working or while you're working is distracting, and that you start sort of looking at what you should do and what you should not do, a sort of self censorship, which I don't think is really beneficial to the process for me. So I don't think of the audience personally when I'm working. What I have in mind is to aesthetically do something that is better than what I've done before. You know, to have this huge effect on people. If there's anything I'm looking out for, is the effect my work will have on people, not necessarily how they'll receive it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as an artist, you have to make the artwork that you have to make. And sometimes it ends up being collectible, or often I do these large scale public works, which probably no one, it's almost impossible to buy it. You'd have to be a, you know, a large institution or a museum or something. So, you know, they're more for an experience or an audience just to wander through and see it. But I think in a way you don't really have any choice about what you're going to make. You know, you have to make what you're going to make, and then maybe it's really collectible, maybe it's not. And I think especially in this field of digital artwork, often it's not collectible. It's difficult to collect it, and it's, you know, something being discussed, I think, in a lot of the panels and conversations at this art fair. How do you know if it's collectible? How can you make people feel comfortable collecting it? It's you know, even just straight video, often people feel uncomfortable collecting it. And having sold different types of digital artwork for so long, in a recent art fair, I made oil paintings based on AI work. And usually, you know, at this art fairs, I would sell like 2 to 5 pieces. So these were just oil paintings, framed oil paintings. I sold 21. So it was a real reminder of how people are still so much more comfortable with the traditional world. So
Yeah.
it's hard. I think our audience, it's a challenge for us as digital, you know, artists, is educating our audience to become better collectors of our work.
Yeah, hopefully this panel will help a bit with that, but I think you made an important point, which is that it's not so much that artists come at the work they're making, you know, both you and Osinachi, that you're coming at the work that you're making as a business strategy. You have a compulsion and you can't not make the work, right? You have to make the work.
People that make it to sell it, you can tell, like, it doesn't have the same feeling.
Right, right. But it wouldn't stop you to, if you feel like you need to work to make something, to move in the direction that you need to move, and you know there's like no chance it's going to sell at all, it's not going to, you're not going to go around that compulsion or that need to create that work. You know, that's always going to be the driving force. One of the things that kind of came up in a few of the responses is, what do I do with all of this work, right? So I think Helena and Mario were saying they kind of share it on Twitter. And as you know, you get further in your career and you make more and more work, one of the things that I recently wrote about that I'm interested, again, more from the collector's side, I think collectors tend to worry about, well, are these things rare? How many of them are there? How many are you going to make, right? And it almost gets sort of sad where people want you to make fewer things as an artist, right? Which is sort of the antithesis of the whole point of all of this, right? But I think that voice can get into the head sometimes of artists. You know, am I making too much? Am I putting too much out there? You know, is my audience seeing too much of what, you know, of what I make? Do I need to artificially slow it down, or slow down how much I show, or slow down how much I sell? I'd love to hear how folks think. I mean, spoiler alert for I'll plug my article. Everything that I've researched shows that making more is better, you know, for artists. You certainly improve through practice. And I couldn't find historical examples where people had flooded their own market. On the contrary, the artists who produced the most were able to generate the largest collector base, because each collector needs a certain amount of work available, and they had more work out there. But you know, people can read the article, but I'm curious about how you all think about that. You know, are you self-conscious or aware about, you know, am I making too much? Am I making too little? You know, and will that impact my audience and my market?
In the NFT space, I sort of hold back. I create this sort of artificial slowness, you know. Of course, I'm creating because a vision comes to me, and I have to put it down, I have to work on it, and I have to put out the work. But then when it comes to sharing, I hold back these days. I share little by little, and not so much, because first of all, the internet is full of a lot of things, and there's information explosion, and there's a lot where you're scrolling Twitter and scrolling and scrolling. They may not have the time to appreciate the work. I'm talking about collectors in the NFT space, and of course the audience. may not have the time to appreciate what you've put out there. Now, what I do is actually to slow down in my sharing. What I mean by sharing is putting works on different platforms. So I try my best not to have, not to mint works on different platforms at the same time. So I could give myself a week, a space of a week after minting on a platform, whether it's sold out or not, and then I can move on to the next platform to share. Or I could decide that I would share this on this particular platform, mint it there, and until it's collected, I'm not going to mint on another platform. So these are decisions I have to take into consideration based on how the market is moving for me. You know, I'm at that stage where my value is growing, and I feel that generally the notion people hold is that when you put out too much at this stage, your value might not appreciate that much, you know. But then in the physical space, I put out works frequently in the physical space. I mean, galleries and marketplaces tend to put out my work, and they're there. People collect in multiples. Of course, my works are in multiples when it comes to the physical space, most of them. That is very much how I imagine it. So at the NFT space, I have to create this artificial slowness in putting out my work. But in the physical space, once I want to do it, I just go ahead and do it. I don't consider when the last time I put out a consignment or not.
It's interesting because, you know, one of the advantages of the digital space that we all participate in now is that you could, it's so much easier to put more work in, but you kind of hold back on the digital side and find yourself not holding back as much in the physical space. I saw your hand go up, Mario, when I first asked the question. Do you have thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, because Osinachi, if I'm not mistaken, you are still kind of working digitally, but still manually, right? You kind of create every painting you make, every picture you make, still in a kind of a manual process. You don't press a button and a new picture appears, right? So
No.
So in a way, you are still kind of like, you cannot only work as fast as you are able to work. So the danger that you flood the market is like, you still already pace yourself, but like I wanted to go, like, now Helena and me, we are making systems that are able to output a few thousand works a day. So, and I mean,
Oh, wait.
maybe, I don't know, maybe I have a faster computer.
Yeah.
No, but, and then of course you look at all of them and think like, yeah, like I would never put them all out. And you also notice, of course, with most of these generative systems, that even though they are very versatile, they are kind of still hovering around a certain theme. So the difficulty is exactly deciding like which are the ones of these 10,000s that I will select to be the artwork, or, and that's kind of my, so, and of course it's kind of that dream, right? Like you build that machine and then it makes money for you. You keep it running. But well, working with this stuff for a while, for me, it is simply that if I build one system, I grew weary of it after a while because I have learned it. So maybe that's the wrong approach, because in some sense, when you look at traditional art, people want kind of more in the same style of that artist. So, well, so
I was surprised with your article because I loved the article, but I feel like artists that are successful often have one style and way of working, and they do that for year after year after year. And I wish I could do that. I just can't. I would be bored. I don't know. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But I feel like that is a recipe for success. But maybe it's not. It wasn't in
commercial.
So I was interested in what you wrote.
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's commercial success, and then there's success in terms of feeling like, you know, you've succeeded as an artist, the right people, you know, like your work, you like your own work. And one of the undercurrents of the article was that not necessarily to make the same thing over and over again, although some people have had success with that for sure, but to not hold back on exploring new ideas out of fear that somehow you're going to overproduce or be over creative. Helena, I know you've sort of
People
more
really
recently.
like to see the
Sorry.
same thing. People like to see and say, "Oh, I know that. I know it's this artist because I recognize it," and that gives them a comfort level. But it's hard to always produce work that's instantly recognizable and still pursue new areas artistic.
Yeah.
It's a
And
balance.
the generative art space.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, are you asking
Yeah, I
if
was
that's
going to
true?
ask. I was going to ask. Yeah, when it comes to recognize and easily recognizable aesthetics, is that something those in the generative art space pay attention to?
Yeah, anyone's welcome to answer that. I mean, I could say what I think. I think what Osinachi's saying is, you know, and you were saying some people can kind of make the same look or feel over and over again. I don't know, when people look at a cause, they know it's a cause, or the Warhol soup cans, or certain things that are iconic, the Obey giant, right? You know, from Shepard Fairey. And I think Osinachi's asking, do we have the equivalent in the generative art space where you look and you're like, oh, that's Vera Molnar. Like you can just tell right away. And it's because it's been repeated over and over again. You know, does that hold true in generative art?
Neural networks, it's like data sets. So we know it's not an author. I mean, that's where you recognize right away all this like trained, I mean, like the stuff with obvious and things like that. So you don't know the artist, but you know the data set.
So the data sets kind of resurface.
Yeah.
But I would argue that, you know, even the artists on this panel, the generative artists on this panel, all their work is pretty distinct. And it doesn't mean that all people who make things using GANs produce distinct work. In fact, most people, I think, produce stuff that looks pretty much the same. But I think that that's what makes it unique when people are able to produce something new that you can say, oh, that's a Mario work, or that's, you know, that's a Helena work, because the artistry is what separates their work from what everybody else maybe is doing. But the flip side of that is if you do the same thing too long and you become too recognizable, maybe you're kind of falling into what Anne was talking about a bit, which is, you know, not exploring new things and just repeating yourself for the sake of getting recognition. I was interested, Helena, you know, that you started sharing some of your work on Super Rare, and in this collection about who the collectors are and who collects. I'm kind of curious about what the experience has been like so far, and then B, you know, I think that that's often a new audience, a lot of folks that kind of come from a cryptocurrency interest background that maybe don't have a lot of experience in collecting art per se, but they're certainly active, and it maybe represents a new group or a new kind of collector. And I'm curious about what your experience has been so far. I know it's been really short.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely won't flood Super Rare because Kate won't let me. But and basically right now I leave her to curate this stuff, and for me it's a bit limiting, because again, like with this like artificial pressure of keeping particular price point and things like that. I mean, you know, I'm very prolific, and that's why I don't like Instagram. And to kind of support this, my being so kind of productive, Twitter is the best approach, because it goes down the kind of like stream and it disappears. And then another thing that I noticed, I mean, I can kind of like keep it from growing, because people who buy my stuff, they're all over the place. So I try to kind of limit to limited editions, put like, let's say 20 works, and that's what you can buy. Guess what? People go to Instagram and pick something that I never printed and ask for this thing. So again, I kind of like decided that's my business model. So between Twitter and Instagram, people pick what they want. Maybe it will become digital, same approach. So, and we actually discussed it with Kate that, for example, if somebody wants something, we can mint it, we can tokenize it per request, in a sense.
No,
So I'll keep this model. I think it's kind of works for me.
As a collector, I can, I mean, it's not all works by one artist are equally enticing, right? So when I fall in love with artists, but I also fall in love with specific works by the artist,
Yes.
right? So I could see
Yeah.
why they would want to go and not just buy. It's almost flattering that they don't see your work as interchangeable, because it shouldn't be, right? So that they have works they want to go after makes sense. I want to bring in something you said at the beginning as sort of a pivot. You know, you had mentioned in your intro that you've enjoyed working on these artist books, and maybe to make it more relevant for the rest of the panel, because I don't know that everyone is making artist books, but as primarily digital artists, I think it'd be interesting to know how you think about outputting physical work versus, you know, selling or sharing work digitally, and certainly in your case in terms of collecting too. So maybe starting with Helena, just a little bit about the draw or the appeal of artist books and tangible physical things, even though you're working largely digitally, and we can kind of go through the panel and talk about how people think about physical output versus just digital output.
So for me, since I train networks on my own art, it starts from analog. And basically the initial idea was like you train on analog art, then it kind of becomes digital, you post-process it, and the output basically goes back to analog. And that's why I kind of got into printmaking and stuff like this. And artist book was a natural kind of progression because of the so much output, which kind of like has a certain narrative maybe. And then this is how like the book of Genesis was born. It was an experiment, but I got hooked. So that's why, again, between this like multiples of output, I think artist book, especially kind of photo book in a sense, it's a very natural outcome of working with neural networks, especially when it's trained on my own art, and especially since you can pun a lot. So there is like all this wordplay that you can do. And yeah, so that's the main attraction. And now I kind of like play with particular physical kind of structure, which inherited into artist books. So that's why how I got into laser cutting, which I do right now. So, I mean, it's sort of like the thing that, like Mario said, you can't stay bored or kind of doing the same stuff. You need to grow.
No, it makes sense. And I don't pretend to be a machine learning artist, but I've played with Runway a little bit and realized how quickly you can be flooded with images that you have to curate. And it's almost like you can only save files so many different places. And I'd imagine that it's sort of rewarding to have a physical thing you can hold in your hand for the ones that you really like. You know you're not going to lose them. You know, I don't want to go too far down the rat hole on this side story, but when I graduated from got my MFA in 2010, the professors, it was a digital program, which was rare back then, 2007 to 2010. And the professors said, okay, for your thesis, you have to make a printed book. And I was pissed. I was so angry. I said, that's like going to get, you know, a master's in flute. And then the day that you're supposed to present, they give you a saxophone. I'm like, I've spent, 3 years, studying coding and all these things. And like, why would you do that? And they said, you will thank us because whatever format you're going to save this book to won't be supported in 5-10 years. And they were right. I think mine was on like a zip drive or something, who knows, right? I mean, that stuff's long gone. So there's something to the physicality. I think, Anne, I'd be interested, you've been collecting, for so long, and I think primarily physical works. How do you think about where, I guess in the early days, folks had to use plotters or else there was no real way to save these things. But how do you think about the tradition of physical work coming out of digital artists?
Yeah, in the early days there, the work it's easy for us to collect it because it's basically India ink on paper. They were plotted with these big plotters that were essentially like a big Etch-a-Sketch machine, and the pen actually had, traditional ink in it. And the papers were high quality because you could put in any paper that you wanted. An artist experimented with all kinds of paper, rice paper, etching paper, drawing papers. So the physical objects are really beautiful, and the archival issues are known because they're basic paper-based artwork archival issues. So from a collector standpoint, they're beautiful to look at, and they literally are drawings. So when you have now inkjet printings, you know, it's raster. So you just have line after line after line. And the effect of lines overlapping is just an optical illusion. You only have one layer of ink. But with a plotter drawing, it actually draws over itself. So you have the effect of the light passing in and out through the layers of ink. So it really is an ink drawing on paper and is beautiful as an object in and of itself. And it's funny because it's high tech, or it was high tech at the time, and it's still, relatively speaking, high technology, but it's an ancient method of art making, you know, paper-based artwork. So it's a nice combination, I think.
No, it's interesting, sort of the combination of the new and the old. One of the things that I'm thinking about is it's probably, my question's probably sort of a false question, in that things don't have to be either digital or physical. You know, a lot of Mario's work that I enjoy, that I've seen, incorporates hardware. So hardware is almost its own thing, right? That we're not really talking about as much here. I don't know that you do as much prints or things like that, Mario, but you do a fair amount of physical work with hardware. Maybe, you know, and maybe correct me if you do a lot around prints. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, actually, I have started making some prints about, like, I occasionally do prints, but I had this phase where I was thinking, oh, well, I mean, I'm working truly like natively digital, and is it correct? Like, what is the true form of this art? Is it just like printing it out, the right form to put it out? But I realized myself that, like, if the art I collect is physical, I like the texture and like that I can touch it. So, and now that I've done some prints, I also like how they come out, and that they, like, it's very different, like from a screen to a print. And actually the process, not everything that looks good on a screen looks good on paper, but it could be the opposite. So sometimes I see something like just printed because I send it to a magazine and say, oh my, so I should make a print of this because actually this looks much better than on screen. But I would say that, yeah, actually most of my major work is physical, but it's more in the form of installations, because that's also my way of getting around this kind of having to select a single piece, because I like to incorporate the entire system that makes the images, or that creates this world of images into a box, and that is then the artwork. And yeah, again, like Anne also said, these things are more to be shown at festivals, in museums, or like there's a very small group of collectors who can afford these, because yes, there's well, it's first often expensive to make them. They need powerful machines, and then there's the whole painful shipping stuff like that, and it gets broken, and of course then, like, especially with these things, yes, the first question, like, maybe you remember that, like, last year Memories of Passers-by was auctioned at Sotheby's, and I mean, the first question is always like, okay, how many years of support do we get, or like, will there be infinite support? And that's like, right, they wouldn't ask that for like a painting. So, and of course, yes, it's a machine, and I mean, I cannot say it will live forever. I can say, yes, we make sure that you get, first of all, the regular hardware, like support we get from the vendor, and then we make sure we have replacement parts, but at some point it will break, and the artwork is not the GPU. So it's actually the system that runs the algorithms that they wrote, and the models that I trained. But if in 10 years or 20 years, kind of this particular motherboard burns down, then there is a backup, and we will replace it, or it will be replaced with something, well, which is probably like a quarter of the size that it's now, and 4 times as fast. But I tell you, it's still the same artwork. And eventually the entire system, like the entire hardware, might be emulated. And that's still fine with me, because that's like, this part is just running it. It's not, it's like, I don't know, like you compose a symphony, and it's being interpreted by different orchestras, and so, but still, like, the symphony is still be seen as the work of art.
Got it. It's the sheet music, not the 80s boombox that plays the cassette, that's important, right? The ideas or the thinking. Although I think some of the hardware is really beautiful in the pieces that you have. And one of the things that came up, there was an article in New York Times, I don't know if folks saw it, maybe a year ago, that's almost warned people about collecting digital art, and it said, be careful if you don't have like a full-time person to help you maintain these things, you shouldn't get into this space, as if we hadn't seen anything like this before. And I think my response, whether it's good or not, I'm not sure, but was that, look at classic cars, right? The whole reason that they're collectible is because they're so hard to maintain. And the reason they're scarce is because they're forever falling apart, right? So there's not like there's no precedent for this idea that things you love because they're important and beautiful and meaningful to you need maintenance. And in fact, it's part of what makes collectors and other genres collectors, is the pride around maintaining these things. But on Osinachi, on your side, I'm interested, as I'm a collector, obviously, of your work and love your work, and thank you for making it. And I ask myself sometimes, do I want the physical print or do I want the digital version on Super Rare? I'm curious, for you, when you're making a work, do you have for each work, a favorite where it's like, oh, I really like this one as a print, but I like this one as more as a digital work? And are there ones that you make exclusively in print or exclusively digital, or you kind of have a version of each for each work?
There isn't really. What I have in mind making a work is that the work, yes, has a digital version, the NFT, and then it has a physical version. I mean, in the next few months, a work that I've sold the digital version on, let's say, Super Rare, might not have been available as a physical work, but certainly in the future, I hope to make it available as a physical work. So I create those two things. That is why I've been working with Kate lately to see to the idea of creating what we refer to as a bundle, where a collector collects both the digital work, the digital version of a work, and the physical for a price together. So each work I produce, I believe, has two lives, and I want each work to have a digital version and a physical version.
Oh, that's helpful. Yeah, I think in some cases I feel like I want both, or in other cases it feels like more I'm drawn to the digital. My as you can see from my bookshelves, my house is a bit of a mess, so collecting digitally is easier for me to maintain, I think. But so I think I've got probably time for one or two more rounds of questions. One of the things I want to think about or talk about on the panel is, again, kind of coming back to this idea of collectors or collectability. Collecting art is a really fun and exciting and rewarding part of my life, but I'm not in a position to spend tens of thousands of dollars, regularly, right? It's, I'm buying things that have to sort of be in the low hundreds. And I've, Mario recently started sharing some work on Rarible, which is exciting to me because it falls within my range. And I, love and have respected Mario's work for a long time, but didn't have any as a collector in my collection. And similar, Anne recently made some works available where 100% of the proceeds went to several charities that helped elevate Black voices. So I think I bought 3 pieces for really a deal that I normally couldn't otherwise, do. And, the 100% of the charity, I think, went to Black Lives Matter. I've got a work that I love from Helena, but it was a gift and I treasure it, I'm glad to see that her work's coming at a point where I can start to afford it. I used to be able to afford some work by Osinachi, but I'm now, through his success in the last few months, I'm sort of, it's another level of collector that I can't quite compete with as much. So there is a question in all this, which is, I think we're seeing things move in an interesting way with the blockchain world. It's not fully, I don't think it's fully figured it out yet. But the old art world really was, outside the realm of what most people would consider something they could participate in. Regularly collecting artwork. I think you might have said, Anne, in sort of our email exchange, it's not something that's like a poor person's hobby per se, right? There are a lot of other things that we have to cover in life before we can afford those things. So I don't know, do you feel obliged? Does it matter? You know, does it make you more relevant, or does it matter to find ways like you have that I've sort of mentioned to make your work available to maybe younger collectors or folks that just don't have, you know, a huge budget set aside? How much does that matter to you? And what are some ways that you think are working or not working to kind of expand that market? I know I said a lot there, but if anyone wants to jump in.
For me,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, you. Go ahead.
Okay. So for me, actually, like I keep getting back to this book format. So for me, it's probably the easiest way to be, because you can't, I mean, it's just like, because you can't price the book too high, it makes it affordable. And again, I mean, they might be not archival, but that's fine, because it's just like something that you have fun for a time being, and then you kind of move along. So I think it's like, again, it's a bit risky, and I don't make like a lot on books, but still, I mean, for me, it's the preferable way to affordability.
Yeah, I have one of your books, and what I love about it is that it puts a lot of work into a single holdable physical object. It's not just one work, it's several works in a format that, you know, that you've really thought through.
I love that question. And when we started collecting artwork, we could barely afford anything. And one of the nice things about these early computer artists was that at that time, because no one else was interested in the work, it was quite affordable. So it was a very rare moment, I think, in art history. And as an artist, I am trying to make things that are, you know, that there is a range of prices. And it is challenging, because you don't want to have work that's so inexpensive that it undercuts your other work, you know, and the art market is a strange place. So if people see that your artwork is selling for a low amount, that can be counterproductive for your career. But I think as long as the pricing makes sense in the overall picture. So if a long video is one price, but you're selling a very short video in another context and it's a lot less, then it makes sense. So actually in the CADAF Art Fair coming up, I do have some pieces, video prints enclosed in acrylic that are kind of like GIFs. So they're very short, and I've priced those extremely low, because I feel like that makes sense in the context of the other videos. Because why should only wealthy people be able to collect art? You know, it's ridiculous. And it's strange, because it's one of the only creative fields in which that's true. You know, you can buy the best music in the world by the best recording artists for 99 cents a song, or stream it for $10 a month. So, you know, there's no comparison with other fields in a way. It's retained this strange kind of old-fashioned marketplace that's very exclusive. So, you know, I would love for that to change, and for us to find other models.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, yeah, you were sort of visionaries getting in. I felt you were able to access sort of the pioneers of generative art collection-wise, the way that I was able to get in a few months early on Osinachi's work, right? Well, while it was still affordable. So yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting view. And it sounds like
that early work is still very undervalued compared to some of the you know, more contemporary work. So if there are collectors watching this panel, it's a good area to look at.
Yeah, I think we have a tendency to talk about the complexities of trying to collect these things, and it scares people away. But there's a lot of reasons to collect them, and I think you're right. A lot of the pioneers are still fairly affordable. Mario, did you have thoughts on, you know, making your work a bit of it available to a broader audience without sort of cheapening it in any way, or?
Well, I mean, my first thought was always like, I mean, my work is available to a broader audience for free when I share it on Twitter. But at the same time, there is a difference between knowing that you own something and just like having it scroll by. But yeah, as Anne already said, like there is this weird kind of art market pricing, which is kind of like, well, I don't know all the unwritten rules, but yes, there's this one thing, like once you sold for a certain amount, you cannot really kind of lower that level a lot. But and so of course I was kind of watching this whole crypto art thing evolving. And initially I was rather skeptical because, I mean, early on, I found the quality, except for very few exceptions, kind of like I didn't feel myself in that field. And again, you don't want to contaminate like the little kind of like steps you already made but now it feels like it's getting more mature, and then there is better work coming up. But then, well, one problem I have in general with that crypto thing is it's a little bit loud and obnoxious. I don't know, but in a way, it's kind of, in a way, it's attention grabbing art, and that's like I have this conflict because yes, in a way, it's true to its nature. It lives on the internet. It has to get attention, but also most of the art is trying to get your attention by blinking a lot. But yes, so anyway, and when Rarible came out, which is kind of like this open for all Wild West thing where nobody is, it's totally uncurated, right? So I said, okay, like I do a little under the radar test just to see how it goes. And well, put a few things up there and well, sold them immediately. And which is when then I actually had some funds on my wallet and started looking around. And then I realized, whoa, yeah, I mean, I know how like discovering a physical work that you really want feels like. Like you see something in a gallery or somewhere and say, wow, I have to have this. And don't even look at the price. And there, now I was scrolling through these things and said, oh, wow, this is beautiful. And I want to have this. And oh, it's so cheap. Well, actually what happened is I think I bought like 7 fakes. That's one of the problems. When I bought exactly the stuff that looked different than the rest, and all that was stolen. So except for like 5 exceptions. So there is still a problem, but I learned how to like now do a reverse image search before. Because yeah, it's still very unregulated, but that's why I went for this kind of just to test out the waters. And I can see how, I mean, I definitely believe this is one future that it will continue and grow. So I have no doubts about it because yeah, and there, as you mentioned before, there are some technical difficulties. I still like, I mean, yes, your token lives in the blockchain, but let's say even the bitmap is somewhere hosted on, it's not in the blockchain, right? It's hosted on a site. So
usually decentralized across a bunch of different, so the IPFS interplanetary.
Is there's good. But yeah, so there are some technical things that I'm pretty sure will be smoothed out. Then if whatever one of those sites goes down, that you can still kind of move your stuff around and it's still like really in the blockchain and not somewhere like hostage to a site that run out of money to run their servers.
That certainly happened. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say real quick that you know, when people look at the variety of quality, whenever you lower the barrier so that more people can participate, I think you're going to get more of a variety of quality, right? Which I think is it's easy to look at that as a negative, and I often was, and maybe I just tell myself this to make myself feel better as I participate, but I look at the markets like Super Rare, almost like a record store, right? Where the fun of going into an old record store isn't that they have the one record I need on the shelf when I walk in and I grab it and walk away. It's that I have to plow through so much stuff that I've never seen before, and so many things that are, you know, I don't look at them and say, this is good, this is bad. I just say, this is weird, or, you know, where did this come from? Or, you know, and it makes the discovery, it's like mining for gold. When you find the work that is good in the giant pile of things that maybe you're not, or I shouldn't say good, that's interesting to you, in the pile of things that are less interesting to you, I think, you know, it makes it that much more exciting. But you know, Osinachi, I'm curious what you think, you know, given that your work's been going up recently and you were kind of nodding during some of Mario's response. I think maybe we'll finish with you, and then I've got one last question that we'll end on because we're getting the cue that we're probably getting close to the hour mark.
Yeah, when it comes to pricing, I think the crypto art market is similar to the traditional market in some way, whereby we see the art market as a place where an artist has to keep moving forward and taking a step backwards in terms of the pricing of their work. It could be detrimental to their career. It's like a video game where you just have to keep moving forward, whatever barriers you have right in front of you. And art in itself is about value. And personally, I believe that as an artist, when you get to a particular value, you have to exceed it and move on to the next stage, higher and higher. Now, the essence of that is not to collect collectors' money, but personally, the essence of that is to give a sort of reward to those who believed in you right from the start, when your work was priced under 1 ETH and so on. And with your work getting value and growing, it also shows that you as an artist are growing. I mean, someone who can appreciate an artwork can look at your work and say, yes, this person's practice is developing alongside his value, the value of his work. And I feel that there's no price that is too much for an artwork, whether in the traditional art scene or in the crypto art scene. I mean, look at CryptoPunk selling for thousands of dollars. And I feel that as an artist, as a crypto artist, that is actually the dream, to keep going higher and going higher, get higher to the point of Trevor Jones, get higher to the point of Hakatao, and so on and so forth. So personally, what I do to actually reach out to those collectors who can't afford my work, who it seems can't afford my work at this point, because I believe sometimes these collectors, they have the money, but they want to split it and get to buy various works and not just put it in one, So I tend to release some early work. Of course, naturally, they are on the price lower than my contemporary works. And I do that mostly on Rarible. With the name Osinachi, everything gets sold out in less than an hour, 2 hours, whenever I put out new work. And I do that occasionally.
Sorry. Whenever I look at Rarible, there's never anything for sale from you. So
I also put out work like it sells immediately. But that is the power of Osinachi, and that is the power of the work. I mean, my work. I feel that when it comes to prices, no. If you are a collector and you are serious about collecting, I mean, there are collectors in the traditional art scene who collect a particular artist. They are known for collecting, say, Picasso, Basquiat, and so on. So if you're a collector and you're serious about collecting a particular piece, I think you should fight for it. Yes, we have economic inequalities whereby some collectors have more money than the others, but that is the reality of the art world.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So we have to wrap it up. I've got a cue here. So I think for the last question, just to kind of rapid fire, keep it super short, maybe just an opportunity to mention someone that you collect, that you like, that people should go check out, a way for us to expand listeners' worlds in terms of other artists. So it could be someone you collect or just someone you admire. Maybe we'll start with, I'll start with Helena. Helena, someone that people should check out that you think is worth collecting.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I just started, so I can't kind of like bring the name. But I'm a junkie of David Hockney, but I will never afford him anyway. So
you could also say Mario. It'll make him feel good. So
you can't afford either. So.
Yeah, we can't afford Mario. Yeah. Anne, anyone that you'd recommend folks check out? It could be a couple of people.
I want to second David Hockney, and he does amazing iPad drawings.
Yes.
You have a traditional artist who does incredible digital work.
Yep.
As well, and they're not as unaffordable as his paintings are. And the artist who I want to talk about is Vera Molnar, shocker. And she's an extraordinary artist who has worked and was trained traditionally, but has also worked with computers since the 60s. She turned 96 this year, and she lives in Paris. And her work is just amazing. She's a constructivist. It's phenomenal work, and she's really just finally getting the recognition that she deserves. We have a lot of her work in our collection, and we've lent it to the MoMA and a bunch of other museums, and several high-profile museums are including her work in upcoming shows, and a university museum is planning a solo show of her work. So I really, I told ArtNet News did an article. I told them I think this 2021 is going to be her year to really hit the big time. So I highly recommend. Just looking at her work is a wonderful experience, and collecting it I think is a sure thing.
Yeah, no, I want to second that. I love Vera Molnar's work, and don't have any, I haven't collected any, but have been following her work for a long time, and she's on my Mount Rushmore of generative artists for sure. One of my all-time favorites. Mario?
So the last actual physical painting I bought was by a Scottish artist named Erlen Tate. He makes really fantastic portraits, super detailed, so I love his work. And let's say on the crypto art scene, damn, I forgot her name, Miss, well, you have one of
Oh,
her.
Miss Al Simpson?
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's the problem. She makes the art that actually I want to make myself. So because it combines, let's say, a collage with these, like, I mean, I love taking pictures of torn down posters. So it's all this combination with some digital. So I really like her work. And well, yeah, I was kind of, I don't know, snatched a few, which actually in this case I'm speculative, because actually I want to get some different ones, but they were too expensive. So I bought everything that was kind of like affordable. so yeah, I really appreciate her work.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you brought it back to someone digital, because you said painting, and I'm like, painting? What are those? This is Osinachi?
Yeah, as most people know, I make my word on Microsoft Word, and there's this artist, Japanese artist, he's 77. I'm looking at his name right on my screen, Tatsuo Horyuchi, and he makes his work using Microsoft Excel.
Yes.
You guys need to check it out. Like, beautiful work, and I think when it comes to digital art, these are people who really deserve, like, to be seen, you know. And also on the crypto art scene, I love Hakatao's work. Their duo, yeah, their work is really beautiful. And there's a Mexican artist, trying to remember his name, Carlos, someone on Super Rare, and he's really good. You know, he makes this work where there's an unending loop. You keep going into a room, to a room, to a room. There's no end.
Yeah, I love, oh, I think you froze there. I love Carlos's, we have similar taste, Osinachi. I love Carlos's work as well. I picked up an animation of his, of the Duchamp's fountain breaking on the ground just yesterday, actually, and I couldn't help but show off my Hackatow.
Yeah.
Well, since you brought him up, well, hey, thank you all for joining. I know it was only a few days' notice. Thanks to CADAF for asking me to come back and moderate a panel. I thought this was a perfect conversation in terms of showing how artists think about the work that they make and its collectability, and that we're collectors too. And you know, you're not going to change. What I took away is that you're going to make what you're going to make, and you're not going to change it for certainly for any business model. But you do think about your audience, and you want to make sure that people that want to find a meaningful way to engage with you, whether that's collecting or other ways, you want to encourage that because it's sort of bi-directionally, mutually beneficial. So thanks again, and I think we'll leave it at that.